Welcome to today's webinar, STEM Classroom to Career, Opportunities to Close the Gap with Michael Kahn, Deborah Dotson, Chris Speisel, Audrey Sullivan, Aaron Hogeboom, and Ben Williams. My name is Greg Nagy, and I am from The Ohio State University and provide technical support for the STEM Equity Pipeline Project along with Freda Walker. Before we start the presentation, I would like to go over some housekeeping items for this webinar. This webinar is scheduled to last roughly 1 hour and 15 minutes and is being recorded in order to view this presentation in its entirety later. The recorded webinar will be available in the next few days on the napeequity.org website. As you've already found out, you'll be watching the presenters present slides through the Adobe Connect interface while listening to them talk over your computer speakers or your phone. You'll also be able to interact using the chat pod. All the participants' microphones and telephones have been automatically muted. If you would like, you can make the presentation larger for your screen by clicking the full screen button at the top of the Adobe Connect window. Click it again to return to your normal screen. You can download resources from the Documents to Download pod. Click the file you want to download, then click the Download Files button. This will open the file as a link in a different tab in your browser. The presenters will answer most questions after the presentation. However, we can take questions at any time. This is how we take questions. At any time during the presentation, you may submit a question by typing your question in the chat pod at the bottom of the Adobe Connect window. We will read and respond to these questions at the end of the presentation. I would like to start the webinar by introducing Ben Williams, Director of Special Projects for the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity. Ben?
Hello, everyone. It's great to be with you all today, and I'm laughing because Greg Nagy was just joined by the mascot of the Ohio State University, Brutus Buckeye, and I have 2 degrees from Ohio State, so I'm laughing over here. So welcome, Brutus. I'm glad you could join us today. So I'm delighted to get us started.
That was good timing.
Greg, we can still hear you.
Yes, I would like that.
Greg, we can still hear you. Okay, so delighted to have you all here today. This webinar is part of our National Webinar Series, which is funded through the National Science Foundation, Gender in Science and Engineering, and the National Alliance for Partnerships in Equity. This webinar is being recorded and will be accessible for viewing as an archived webinar on the NAPE website later this week. You can visit our website at napeequity.org. You can then click on Professional Development, and under that access this webinar as well as the archived webinars from the past year. If you would like to archive any webinars beyond the last year or be able to access those archived webinars, those are also available through our YouTube channel, also accessible from that link. At the end of the session today, there will be a certificate of completion that each participant will be able to download and keep for your own records. And I want to also alert you all to the fact that right in the middle of your screen right now, just below the image from my camera, there are documents to download that will help to complement the material and information that's being shared today and help you to go deeper into the information that's being provided. There's a handout that's a summary of the key takeaways as well as the objectives, including web pages and other areas of interest directly relative to today's webinar. There is information about the secondary school survey that educators can participate in this year, which will be the follow-up to the report that we'll be talking about. There's a link to the report itself and an infographic that is an excellent summary of the findings of the report that can be useful as you're describing this and sharing it with others. And then there's information about our organization's products and services, which I'll talk a little bit more about at the end of our time together as well. So at any point during the webinar, you can simply upload those files directly onto your computer and keep those for reference in the future. Throughout the course of our time together today, we welcome folks to chat through the chat function that you'll see right there. If you have thoughts, you have ideas, you have suggestions, you have resources, and if you have specific questions, because we'll make sure that there's time at the end of our time together today for some of those questions to be entertained by our presenters. So please use the chat function. That will help to enhance everyone's experience throughout the day. And we will also be engaging in a structured chat a little bit later in our time together. So the objectives of today's webinar are several. And that is, first, that participants will learn about the challenges and prospects revealed in the report STEM Classroom to Career, Opportunities to Close the Gap. You'll learn implications, solutions, and strategies for both the formal and informal educational environment and programs that are offered within those environments, promising practices that can strategically increase the STEM workforce, how to leverage equity to pave the way for students to realize their full potential and their career pathway, and resources, including the infographic I talked about before, to use in STEM, career technical education, and equity programs. So the focus of our webinar today is on the report STEM Classroom to Career, Opportunities to Close the Gap, which is the result of a collaboration between Destination Imagination, the National Girls Collaborative Project, the National Alliance for Partnerships in Equity, and the Educational Research Center of America, which makes up the Research Consortium on STEM Career Pathways. And so it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you our first presenter of the day, Dr. Michael Kahn, Senior Vice President, Research in Student Research Foundation at the Educational Research Center of America. Michael, take it away.
Thank you for the introduction, Ben. Thank you very much. And as Ben mentioned in the introduction, I'm going to present some findings from our past research. Currently, we have surveys going on at the high school level that are currently in the field. So if any of you receive surveys from the STEM Consortium, STEM Research Consortium on STEM Career Pathways, I'm sorry, I'm stumbling on that, please do feel free to consider responding. And if you don't receive that, our contact information is in the handouts, and you can write to me directly and request a survey as well. So the research that we did was involving high school students, and I'll talk about that in a second. The goals of the research were primarily to inspire a dialogue, as you see on the screen, among parents, educators, counselors, and students on the students' choice of career pathways. And it's also very important to see what students have to say, to hear the voice of the students, to better align programs and services with their needs. What we did is we conducted an in-class survey through the mail of students and teachers that was distributed nationwide. The surveys were mailed to teachers who we identified as teaching STEM classes, and we received a total of over 7,300 student responses. As I present this information, my intention here is really to help set up the conversation that will come later about implications and action steps and what can be done. The other thing I just wanted to mention is while I'm presenting, feel free to also have a conversation in the chat pod. And while you're doing that, if there are specific questions about the research, my colleague Deborah Dodson, who worked on the data closely, will be available to answer those specific questions in the chat as well. So one of the first questions we asked was about how students felt their STEM courses would be relevant to their future careers. And what you see here, the light bar are females, the darker bar is males, and they were roughly equal in how they rated the importance of STEM studies to their future careers, and that meaning very or extremely important. And when you look at this, I mean, one reaction that some people have had is that the glass is half full, and the other is that the glass is half empty, because we know there's a great demand for future workforce to be STEM sophisticated. So I'd be curious what you think about that too in the chat and later on in the Q&A. As we look deeper at what students are selecting, we had a question that had over 100 checkoff choices on future majors and or careers that they could select. And we group them by STEM groupings and by healthcare aspirations because we saw a very interesting contrast here. And once again, the lighter bar are females and the darker bar are males, and I think the slide is pretty self-explanatory that males tilt much more strongly towards selecting at least one STEM option. They could choose up to 2 from that list. And females, on the other hand, are choosing health career. And just a comment, as I see there's a question in the chat about how, well, I can't answer that right now, but how STEM courses were defined. The STEM courses, what we looked at were teachers that taught science, technology, engineering, and math broadly in high school, and that's what we were looking for. So we're trying for a wide reach. As we dig deeper, this gets to be a really interesting piece here as we look at confidence in STEM abilities. And the way the question was worded is, how confident are you that your STEM abilities and skills will enable you to enter a STEM career? And once again, the lighter bars are females, the darker bars are males. And we see an overall pattern where females are less confident than males overall. And this relates to a lot of other research that's out there, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, that shows that even when females are achieving grades and completion of courses as highly as males are, sometimes there's a differential there in confidence. And to the extent that confidence plays into persistence, this becomes a really important issue. The overall bars for males and females are below 50%. That's striking in itself. And then even more surprising, when we look at AP students who checked off that they were taking AP STEM courses, it still persists. And later on we'll talk about what might level out those differences in confidence. As we shift to, oops, it jumped ahead here. As we shift to looking at the relevance of STEM courses to future careers by race and ethnicity, we formed 2 general groups. And the way we did this is the darker bar represents historically overrepresented groups in STEM careers. And by that we mean Caucasian Americans and Asian Americans. So that's grouped together. And the lighter bar represents African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Native American Indians. Once again, the importance of STEM is pretty equal here. And that's striking. As we dig in deeper, though, and we look at the completion of STEM courses by senior year, we see a difference that also shows up in other research where there's definitely a differential. And it's interesting that females in the historically overrepresented groups are even higher than males on this, but the general pattern is that the historically underrepresented groups are not completing as many STEM classes by the end of senior year, at least by their self-report. And as we continue to look even deeper, we see among seniors who are taking an AP STEM class, this same pattern persists. And we know that this is not entirely a matter of personal choice because there's other research by the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, which many of you may be very familiar with, which talks about the availability of coursework at the high school level, and it's quite striking. And once again, we can insert some of those links here in the chat with the help of my colleague Deborah, and it's definitely the case that physics, chemistry, calculus, all those courses that are sort of touchstone and bridges are differentially distributed in high schools. As we shift to looking at creative learning and STEM and the intersection of those two, we see a really interesting pattern here, which is we ask students about whether they had the opportunity to experience creative learning in their STEM classes. And once again, the light bar are females, the dark bar are males. And what you see here is that as students experience greater creative learning in the classroom, their confidence is higher. Now, of course, we could talk a lot about cause and effect here, but we do believe that being able to experience creative learning may be a door opener. And as part of this project, we also asked the teachers to respond, and we had about 175 teachers who sent back surveys. And creative learning, we just asked that in a very general sense. I see on the chat, how is it defined? That Deborah is going to help with that. As we asked teachers about do they allow students to express their knowledge creatively in STEM courses, about a quarter say they always do, and the vast majority say they do at least sometimes or often. So on one hand, that's encouraging. On the other hand, we'd like to see this perhaps closer to 100%. When you ask a similar question of students about whether they feel they've had the opportunity to learn creatively in STEM classes, the percentages are a bit smaller on the high end. The always slice here is 12%, although once again, the vast majority say at least sometimes that happens. So perhaps this is a good point for discussion later. And then when we go back to asking students about how important do they think creative learning is to their success in STEM subjects and future careers, it boosts up, and 23% feel it's very important, 32% feel it's extremely important, so over half value it highly, and then quite a few more also say it's important in general. So what we'd like to talk about now is solutions that drive towards supporting creative learning in STEM classrooms and programs, and also solutions that could address structural inequalities that contribute to an unequal STEM playing field. And with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Chris Beisel from Destination Imagination. Chris?
Hello, thank you. It's great to be here today. I appreciate this opportunity, and we really enjoyed being a part and continuing to be a part of this survey. I am the Educational Director for Destination Imagination. I was previously a team manager for 15 years. And for those of you who don't know what Destination Imagination is, we are an educational nonprofit that focuses on providing opportunities for students to use their creativity to solve challenges that are based in STEM and the arts. And we do that in a variety of ways with a variety of different academic challenges that kids can decide to do. They form a team, choose a challenge, and then work on the challenge on their own. They have an adult mentor, but that person doesn't do anything to help them solve the challenge. They have to figure out how to solve the challenge on their own. We believe, and we've been doing this for quite a while, Destination Imagination has been around for 15 years, so we were kind of ahead of the game on project-based learning. One of our big tenets is to solve this problem is we have to start earlier than high school. We have to start a lot earlier than high school. Kids need to be interested and engaged in STEM from the time they're walking and exploring, so toddlerhood. And we actually have challenges that are designed for those kindergarten through second grade that involve STEM and the arts. So our solutions, our challenges, allow the kids to explore, build, and solve on their own. They try things, it fails, they try again. They keep trying until they find a solution. They go find other materials. We have them use materials in new ways. We build towers out of interesting, Chanel stems and a potato masher. Build us a tower out of something like that. And we work on getting them to explore and figure things out on their own. And like I said, we do this through challenges. And last year, like for example, our technical challenge was a vehicle challenge. And the kids had to build a vehicle that had 2 propulsion methods and 2 movement methods. It had to go back and forth across the stage as many times as they could in 8 minutes. But the tech doesn't stand alone. They also had to create a story and a set and costumes that explain what the tech is doing. Some kids built giant, we had a middle schooler built a zip line, 20-foot zip line that they had to figure out how to get in the gym door and rebuild it on the inside of the gym, that the vehicle zipped down and then zipped across. We had other kids, we had elementary students building hovercrafts out of cardboard and leaf blowers and plastic bags. Kids worked really hard to solve these challenges, and they worked on research on their own and doing it on their own, and it's very hands-on. So we really think one of our solutions, there are a variety of other solutions that we'll talk about today, but our solution to this issue is to start them early and get that hands-on information going. We include art in the STEM, so it's more engaging. We have girls who come thinking, oh, I get to build costumes, and then they end up being the strongest structure builder. So, and boys who come thinking that they're going to do all the technical work, and then they find out that they actually like writing stories and acting. So bringing art into STEM really helps the kids be engaged and entertained and excited about what they're doing. So when they start doing something like this in kindergarten, or even earlier at home where their parents let them take apart clocks and figure out how to put them back together and really getting their hands into things, they're going to be more engaged. So when they get up to high school, that they're going to be more interested in continuing on in a STEM career because they have that confidence. They already figured out how to do this. They built a hovercraft that floated across the stage, and they did that when they were in the 4th grade. They're going to be more engaged and more excited. Informal education really needs to be a part of all of this because our education system has a whole lot of goals that those kids have to meet. And it gets difficult to fit these kind of learning opportunities right back into the classroom during the day. So informal opportunities after school, before school, clubs, parents taking on things, Girl Scout meetings, Boy Scout meetings, robotics, all of those things that are informal education really helps hook those kids early, which I think is the most important part, hooking them early so they're excited about what they're doing. So as you look at informal opportunities, look at all the ways that you can bring in the hands-on, the art, into your STEM program so you can engage all kids and all kids can be interested. If you have any questions, we'll answer those at the back. And I am going to introduce you to our next speaker, who is Audrey Sullivan, who is a consultant for the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity. Audrey?
Good afternoon, everyone, and it's my pleasure to share with you some of the exciting work that the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity is doing to implement solutions that increase student access, educational equity, and workforce diversity for STEM and career and technical education programs. The STEM Classroom to Careers Opportunities to Close the Gap report included several strategies to help us close that gap, including identifying and overcoming micro-messages that threaten student STEM self-efficacy, the belief that the student might have about her ability to accomplish a particular task, to be successful in a STEM career or a STEM course. Let's take a look at the NAEP cultural wheel. You'll notice that we have cultural stereotypes and biases that really influence our behavior, what we say, how we say it. And over time, these micro-messages accumulate, and they can, in turn, impact a student's self-efficacy, whether or not that student believes that they could be successful in a particular career, whether it is science, technology, engineering, or math. We know that through that accumulation of positive micro-affirmations, those positive micro-messages, that an educator can have a true impact on that student's ability to perform well in science, technology, engineering, and math. The definition for a micro-message is really that small, subtle, sometimes unconscious message that we send or receive when we interact with others. We know that they can be positive, meaning that our interactions and behavior are encouraging and, in fact, really are positive and intentional in terms of saying who might be included in that course for science, technology, engineering, or math. They can also be negative, often referred to as micro-inequities. And here we see that our language and behavior may have the impact of being exclusionary, negative, not inviting. We know that there are micro-messages in a number of different means. It can be what I say, and by that it is, I might say, I'm really happy to be in this particular course, and you would think, all right, that's something very positive. But I might use those same words. I might say something like, I'm happy to be in this STEM course. And you would know by that tone, that intonation, certainly by that sigh, that my intent and true feeling about that course may be other than those exact words I espoused in the first example. Micro-messages can be nonverbal, eye-rolling. Our body stance, our body language also conveys whether or not we have an interest in a particular thing. Contextual micro-messages. I have a habit now of walking into a school or educational institution and looking at what is actually viewable. Do I look in the trophy case and see what is being valued by that school? When I walk down the hallway and see posters or read bulletin boards, what messages are being communicated to students? And do we in fact have messages that are encouraging of students from all walks of life really expressing and being encouraged regarding their interest in science, technology, engineering, or math? It's also about what we don't say or who we don't include. We'd want to do things like take a look at our materials. Are they really representative of the very population of students that we're interested in engaging and keeping informed? And finally, we see across the top of that graphic that we are interested in praise and criticism. It matters the kind and the manner in which we deliver feedback. I'd like your help on a chat activity. If I were to walk into your educational institution today and was looking particularly for contextual micro affirmations, those very positive things that would tell me that you are encouraging exploration in STEM careers, what might I see? Please put your responses in the chat box feature. What might I see as I walk down those halls, look in the trophy case, read your school motto, examine a poster? I was at a middle school in Austin, Texas this week, and the first thing I noticed in looking at the trophy case was a very large, pushed to the very front of the cabinet, a robotics trophy. And I thought, this is interesting. Yes, we're typically interested in seeing sports and sometimes on occasion other academic pursuits. But how interesting when we see things that are actually helping us to encourage students to pursue STEM careers. And I see by some of your responses that you have murals, posters, and things like that that are saying through micro-messaging to those students, we value and encourage you to make that particular choice. The next example that I have on the screen are Kudo Cards, and I want to acknowledge that NAEP has done a fabulous job in pointing out the many different aspects of what a student might be interested in that would trigger their interest in STEM careers. My favorite is the one there at the front. You are super creative. The Kudo card has a space there for the educator to list why they are giving this particular card to the student, actually saying to them with very specific, authentic details why that particular creative thing you did is actually relevant to creative problem solving and to innovative design that would be very beneficial in a science, technology, engineering, or math career. So we see that it is really a number of things that help us to actually define micro-messaging. As part of the NAEP professional development training, we use this acronym, RADIO. We're trying to be reminding ourselves that we each have cultural stereotypes and biases that influence our conversation, our behavior. We want to really anticipate that what we say, how we say it, the things we do actually are reflective of those words and behavior, and that we want to make sure that we are getting rid of, addressing those negative micro messages that might be discouraging to a girl or a woman pursuing this field, that might be discouraging to racial or ethnic groups that want to pursue something that might not have been a traditional career choice for someone. We want to identify those positive micro messages, and today we've looked at a couple of examples, that contextual poster, trophy case, and that very tangible Kudo card, that are ways among many that we can begin to give those positive micro messages to students. When we do that, we know it has the impact and important one of actually helping that student to increase their self-efficacy about their ability to perform well in a STEM course or a STEM career. And finally, that O in radio is that we continue to offer very positive, authentic feedback. I have high expectations. I know that you can meet them, and that we can be successful in STEM careers. The overarching goal is to create an equitable learning environment. You see the graphic here that describes the difference between equality and equity. For equality, we are giving each student the same. In equity, we're giving to each student as they need. A very important concept if we are to really close the gap in looking at who is interested and who can be successful in pursuing STEM careers. We know from this economic graphic that if we are successful in closing this gap, we have much, much to gain. And by contrast, if we don't, certainly a lot to lose. As we look at this final slide about solutions, we know that one of the many strategies represented in this particular report talk about the importance of micro-messaging and the impact that that educator can have on a student's STEM self-efficacy. We want to be looking at strategies that help us address structural barriers, those cultural stereotypes, those implicit biases that we all carry, and that we want to be encouraging through these different strategies to increase STEM participation, persistence, in career choice for girls, for women, for historically underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. And most importantly, we are interested in creating an environment in which every student is given what they need to be successful. I'd now like to introduce to you our next presenter, Erin Hogenboom, and she will be speaking from the perspective of the National Girls Collaborative. Erin?
Thank you so much, Audrey, and happy good afternoon and good morning to some of you who this is still morning time. Yes, my name is Erin Hogenboom. I'm the Community Development and Network Strategy Manager at the National Girls Collaborative. The National Girls Collaborative project is a national network of girls-serving STEM programs committed to maximizing access to shared resources for increased organizational capacity for serving girls and underrepresented youth in STEM. So I have the honor today of doing a bit of summary on the solutions and strategies that we identified through this consortium for the approach towards STEM and creativity and how to work towards more equitable processes. So to the very first point was creating a creative space or promoting a creative space. And this taps into exactly what Chris from Destination Imagination was discussing, which is bringing in the creative sphere into your STEM curriculum. And this can be in a way that engages the youth in actually creating that curriculum with you and making them a part of that process, which will then also determine, help them feel a part of the curriculum building and the creative process. I'd also like to encourage you as educators to think outside the box in terms of when you discuss STEM careers. Now, STEM careers can be from anything very, what a lot of you think was just a scientist or have a clear vision in their head, but it can really go outside of the box as well. And so as an educator, encouraging creativity not only in your STEM classroom, but also when you think about the careers that you're exposing to your different students or to your youth. The next piece is managing that micro-messaging. And we all come with certain biases to the table. And so the very first, as Audrey pointed out, way to address micro-messaging is to be aware of it and to be reflective of it. And I'll be sharing in the chat in just a moment some of a tool that you can use to help do some of that reflection. The Harvard Business School has a implicit bias test, which is, my apologies, I don't think it's a business school, but Harvard has an implicit bias test that everyone can take and review maybe what some of those inherent biases are so that you can be aware of them, so that when you do speak with youth or your students about STEM and just their career paths in general, you can focus on what implicit biases maybe you are taking to the table. The second piece is boosting confidence. So Michael brought forth the idea that actually expanding and experiencing creative learning also boosts confidence for both young girls and for students in underrepresented groups. So we see that creative piece as well as the mentoring and role modeling piece. So we know at the National Girls Collaborative Project that if students can see someone in a role that they are, it's easier for them to imagine themselves being in that role. So that is the role model aspect, so someone that they can aspire to being. But there's also the mentorship piece, someone who can walk them through, the information and the informational gaps in the learning, and to be able to suggest maybe what class they take next, or help them kind of imagine where they could see their career going. And so that's both a role model, aspirational piece, and a mentoring piece. And so that is a large confidence booster. And then finally, I put along with boosting confidence, fostering resilience and grit. And there is a really great TED Talk provided by Angela Lee Duckworth on grit, and we think that mentors can really help also youth and students get from that one piece of aspiring and seeing a role model to actually being able to go through all of those different challenges and be able to have that resiliency and grit and aspire towards a STEM career. And I'll provide resources in the chat box as well that link to the TED Talk and to our FEM's website, which is the National Girls Collaborative, our mentoring website, where either students who are interested in finding mentors can go and find mentors, or mentors can put their information in. Women STEM professionals can put their information in to share with, so that they can be connected with young girls and youth. And then finally, the last piece is addressing the structural inequalities. And Michael touched on this as well, that the availability of the proper courses, such as physics and calculus, et cetera, are not always equitably distributed throughout our high schools in the United States. And so how do we address that issue and work together so that we can better address those structural inequalities? And we recognize, all of us in this consortium recognize that we are not the experts we're experts in terms of delivering this information, but there's a lot being done out there, creative ways of teaching and learning and bringing creativity into the classroom. And so we thought that this would be a really great moment to gather some of your ideas about how do we bring creativity into the classroom. We've got a lot of participants on this call who are experts in their own right and are doing this work every day and have seen what works and what doesn't work in their classrooms and in their STEM programs. So we thought that this would be a really great opportunity to pose a question to you, the audience, in terms of how what's being done in your neighborhoods and in your communities with regard to this. So if we can move on to the next section. So this chat activity is, we're going to ask you all to share your thoughts about creative learning and or structural inequalities. And this is related to your formal or informal STEM programs. So what you're seeing. So we're really going to focus on those two pieces today. And you'll see in the next section, there will be 3 columns divided up. And the titles at the top of those columns are pre-elementary school, middle and high school, and post-secondary. And you can see the question there in the bottom left-hand corner. Please share your thoughts about creative learning and or structural inequalities related to your formal or informal STEM programs. So I'm seeing Christopher said fixed mindset in middle and high school column, which is a really important, the fixed versus growth mindset is incredibly important in terms of thinking creatively and using creative learning. Great, thank you. Yes, so please, as a reminder, go ahead and put in your thoughts here about your thoughts on creative learning or structural inequalities related to your formal or informal STEM programs. I'm feeling some really great feedback here from everyone in terms of content for resources. If anybody has ideas on resources in the pre-elementary or pre-K kindergarten and elementary column, please go ahead and if you have ideas about shared resources, maybe you've seen some. There's a question about how creativity can be used in the K-12 classroom. If anybody has an idea on how creativity can be used in the K-12 classroom, we'd love to see that idea in the middle and high school column. In the post-secondary column, we have a really great comment from Esperanza that it's not just about females enrolling, it's about minority females enrolling as well. So if anybody has creative ideas on how to engage minority females in the post-secondary sphere. Or address those structural inequalities as well. Why aren't kids engaged in that sphere? That's an interesting question as well. I'm seeing some shout outs for Alyssa for her comment that female elementary school teachers who lack confidence in their own math skills might be reinforcing the belief that girls aren't good in math. So reflecting on our own actions and our own insecurities as well. That's an important piece of this. We have an idea from Marty about helping volunteer in the classroom, host tours, and giving financial support. That's probably a good way to get infused with new ideas as well. I see Laura calling out a disconnect between classwork and career. How can we help bridge that gap between classwork and career? Great. We'll do this for another 2 minutes. So please, if you haven't put your idea in yet, go ahead and share your idea, your thought about creative learning or structural inequality related to your formal or informal STEM program. So what are you seeing happening in the day-to-day?
Well, hi, everyone. We had some good, rigorous conversation going on there in the background, and some really great ideas. I think there was a lot of good thoughts around this notion, especially at the elementary school level, where teachers don't have a lot of STEM confidence themselves, and how do we potentially, what are the options around working with STEM teachers to help them build their own self-efficacy around STEM so that they can share that with students. There was also some discussion around the need for resources as well at the elementary school level that were available for students to be able to see people in various careers that potentially look like them. And the also problem-based learning, the application of creativity in elementary school classrooms really provides an opportunity for students to sort of see the whole of their options, like in theater arts and other creative music opportunities as well. So, and Lori, I'll just mention something that Lori said about the fact that she's planning a career fair and involving the elementary school counselors and elementary students. I think that's a fabulous idea, and I hope she has great successes with that. Thanks, Erin.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating in this kind of creative space. We thought that this might be a good modeling of how you can gather ideas from a lot of different directions and how actually bringing people together.
Hi, Erin. Hi, everyone. Just to piggyback on that last comment, this similar theme cropped up through our thread about particularly females and minorities needing mentors that would allow them to see people like them moving forward. More generally, there was a lot of discussion about having projects be focused around hands-on learning and having students getting involved in the definition of what success means. And then morphing from that was a portion of the discussion that talked about external partners being engaged in the educational process, particularly bringing in real-world problems and, in that case, energizing students to see the connection between the curriculum and what they're doing. And we know from other research that for females in particular, this seems to be really, the relevance question is very important. And there was just so much here. I'm having trouble summarizing it all. But local business mentorship partnership opportunities. There was some discussion about how mentorships and internships could have complicating issues, but then how to make them work well as well. Particularly since there's been some work on females in engineering internships and how that can go well or not. So that's and there's a citation in there to look at from the Harvard Business Review. And then finally, towards the end, a great deal of discussion about collaboration and project-based learning and bringing the arts into some in the form of STEAM as well. So it kind of echoes a lot of the things we've been talking about throughout this webinar. Okay, over to you, Erin.
Being able to see someone who looks like them in that field is really important. And I love the idea of involving the counselors at the career fair. That's great. Okay, so we'll go next to Michael, who is helping to moderate the.
Okay, well, thank you. To piggyback what both Mimi and Michael have shared, there were some similar themes. One of the first issues had to do with the formal educational environment, and that is the importance of giving opportunities in post-secondary environments for students to apply learning to real-world problems, which was the theme that was brought up before. So project-based learning being a key piece of that, as Michael just talked about. And one of the examples that we can draw from is the success in STEM programs and career technical education through to look at application and also engaging with business and industry. In terms of the informal educational environment in post-secondary institutions, there were examples such as robotics clubs, student organizations in career technical education where students can compete in a collegial environment and be able to apply their learning through that, things like Skills USA, for example, as well as STEM camps that give the institutions opportunities to engage with students in the K through 12 arena, and the opportunities for then those students, especially those students from historically underrepresented groups, to act as mentors to younger students. So college and university students working with high school students, or working with middle school students, or even working with elementary school students, builds the self-efficacy of both student groups. It both helps to retain those students who are in those post-secondary programs, and it also helps to promote those opportunities to those younger students and acts as an effective means to recruit them into those pathways down the road. That being said, really what was reiterated was the critical nature of role models in whom students can see themselves mirrored, and to be able to see those examples as successes, and also recognize the barrier of narrow lenses that are often applied when students look at STEM, especially when they don't see those examples. So the importance of making sure that we really expand the lenses through which students look at STEM pathways. As the report found, the importance of really expanding those perceptions, especially for female students and students from historically underrepresented racial and ethnic minority groups. And to that point then, it's critical for post-secondary colleagues to then engage counselors and advisors in the post-secondary environment to do that.
All of that information, that was really fantastic. I again just want to thank all of our everybody who put information in here. Even if you didn't have something to share, I hope that watching this dialogue was helpful for you in seeing maybe what some of your colleagues or other people in your sectors are doing to really expand the different types of creative learning. Again, just to touch on some of the highlights that really surfaced were role models and mentorships. As I said, I'll be sharing the FAPM's link in the chat box so that you can check that out when we're done here. We talked about students being part of the process in defining success and career pathways. I think that's a really important key point in being as inclusive with your students as possible, or the students who are being involved in your programs, whether it's through focus groups or engaging them in the curriculum development, is really fantastic. And engaging the external partners to bring in real-world problems. And I apologize that there's some technical issues on my end. So I'll go ahead and move it along. I'll be sharing the links in the it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ben Williams, again to you, the Director of Special Projects at the National Alliance for Partnerships in Equity. Thank you so much, Ben.
Thank you, Erin. That was fabulous. I really enjoyed getting the opportunity to engage with our participants through our looking at the different environments within the pipeline, if you will, through both the lens of the formal and informal educational environment. I hope you all enjoyed the chat and also got some new ideas, some new thoughts, some new resources, and connections with colleagues that can help to advance your goals around increasing access and equity in your STEM programs. So what we'd like to do is open it up for a broader conversation, a broader opportunity for questions that may not have been answered yet through the course of our hour together thus far. So what kinds of questions do people still have? And I would like to invite my colleagues who have presented thus far for today into the chat. I realize that I just jumped the gun, so let's just hold off for a second. We'll open it up for questions and answers after I summarize some important takeaways. And that is to reiterate what we've talked about thus far, and that is we want to support creative learning in the STEM classroom and in programs throughout elementary, middle, high school, and secondary programs, and then into the post-secondary environment. There were questions around well, how do we define creative learning? In the case of this survey, creative learning was left in part to the interpretation of the people who were completing the surveys. What would add depth to this conversation, of course, would be interviews or focus groups or other things like that. So if you were interested in doing this kind of action research on the ground, those are the kinds of things you could ask of people you might be working with. But what's critical, as we've talked about throughout the course of our conversation, is addressing the structural inequalities that contribute to an unequal STEM playing field. So we know that there is equal interest across the demographics we've talked about, yet there's very unequal participation. And we've really started to peel the onion, if you will, of the reasons and the dynamics for that. So one of the things that will be critical as we move forward is to look at how can we remove those barriers so that students can have full access to the opportunities available in STEM pathways and ultimately STEM occupations. And we do that by managing micro-messaging, replacing the micro-inequities that Audrey was talking about with the micro-affirmations, things like the Kudo Cards, things like the other opportunities that we've talked about today, boosting students' confidence and fostering resiliency and grit. And then being aware of these dynamics as educators and becoming reflective in our own practices, looking at where we might stumble into some of those implicit biases that we were talking about, and then addressing those, really trying to be intentional about removing those barriers that might exist to students and mitigate those root causes for why underrepresented students through the lenses of gender and race and ethnicity are still not accessing those STEM pathways to the degree that the historically overrepresented students are. So with that, I would like to invite all my colleagues who have presented thus far today into the chat, and want to open it up for additional questions that participants might have of us. Okay, well, Patrice is asking, what practical tools can be used to identify and change micro-messages? Is there a catalog of useful strategies, tools in this area? Is the most effective strategy intentional affirming micro-messaging, i.e. Kudo Cards mentioned? So actually, I'll respond to that first question just to get us started. So NAEP, the National Alliance for Partnerships in Equity, has a comprehensive professional development program called Micro-Messaging to Reach and Teach Every Student. And we also have tools such as the Kudo Cards and toolkits, which I'll be talking about a little bit later, which are designed around helping educators to be aware of the ways these implicit biases may create barriers to student success in STEM and career technical education, and then give them what we call super strategies to go about addressing those. So to answer your question, yes, there are a number of tools that you can access, and I'll talk about those a little bit later in our time together. So let's see what other questions people have.
It looks like
is there anything that remains unanswered for any of our participants? How is STEM career planning incorporated into classrooms successfully? Ah, great question. Let's open that up to our colleagues. So take it away, whomever would like to respond first. Or maybe what we could do is, as hosts and presenters, let's raise our hand. There's a little hand icon, a little person raising their hand in our toolbar. So if you would like to respond to the question, go ahead and click on that, and I will call on you. So the question is, how is STEM career planning incorporated into classrooms successfully? Would any of our presenters like to respond? Okay, let's do, here we go. Erin, how about you take it first?
Touched on in the high school and middle school chat, but it of collective impact, where you're bringing in people from for-profit, non-profit, and I see this interacting in your question in the way that you would bring potentially in mentors or role models into the classroom so that to engage students in that real dialogue about what their day-to-day looks like. I think that would be a really interesting way to help bring in some outside
Great, thank you, Erin. Audrey, you had your hand up as well. Would you like to comment?
I wanted to mention that we've seen some exercises through the NAEP Professional Development Program where we use the grand challenges and have the educators think of a way to actually talk about what are some of these major issues that we're facing in a way that a student would find interesting. And so it's a way to use both your creativity in addition to trying to make these very big problems relevant to today's students. I saw in terms of some of the chat, things that we want to really think about is how can science, technology, engineering, and math really be relatable to students in a manner that makes them interested and engaged in the topic. So we want to hit on a number of different strategies to gain their interest and to have them want to continue to pursue this by looking at not just monetary reasons to go into those fields, although they are some of them very wonderful in terms of a career choice, but also things like I would be able to help people, I would be able to be collaborative. It really does allow for my creativity to be maximized and used. So I think you can use tools like the grand challenges and have that be a student exercise to talk about what are some of these major issues the country is facing, the world is facing, and how does STEM really help in that regard.
Terrific. Thank you, Audrey, very much. Do any of our other presenters want to share any other thoughts to that question? Michael?
From Destination Imagination.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chris. Please, go ahead.
Actually,
that's okay. Sorry, but
Ben,
I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand. So, one of the things that popped into my head while everyone was talking is somehow we've also got to get parents believing that the children are capable of these things. And sometimes by starting early, like I talked about, we can have parents involved in teaching the kids doing this and helping the kids do this. And the parents then start seeing what their kids are capable of. I think when our vision as parents is slowed or defined as to what we think our kids can do, we pass that on to our kids. So I think helping us figure out how to get to those parents is a really good idea, a really good way to get kids to believe in themselves.
Thank you for reminding us of the importance of parents. That is not a key stakeholder and a key person in students' lives that has come up yet. So thank you for highlighting that for us. Michael, was there something else you wanted to comment on?
Well, actually, I was going to ask Chris to speak about Destination Imagination, and she just did. And Chris, that's a great point about parents, and given the changing nature of work, getting parents involved with young children, middle and high school children as well, opens their eyes to what the possibilities are, and I call it reverse teaching in a way. I know I've learned from my daughters as time goes on here. The other comment that I saw up the scroll a bit was from Mary Beth about CTE programs bringing mentors and guest speakers into the classroom. And Mary Beth, of course, you probably are very familiar with Skills USA, and they do a great job of many dimensions of that kind of work where they're injecting real world into the classroom experience. So I just wanted to note those two things. And Chris, thank you. Chris, do you want to talk about NASA at all? Because you all have a relationship with NASA that seems to be very powerful in working with the kids to see the wide range of possibilities that are out there. I mean, when we were in Alabama last month, it was just kind of mind-blowing seeing what was going on.
Yeah, we have a Space Act agreement with NASA, and that gives us access to all of their curriculum, but it also gives them the opportunity to come work with our kids when we can. And so at our culminating event called Global Finals, NASA actually comes and all the kids get to play on equipment and get to do a variety of different things. We are also working on building that relationship with them, so we have more opportunities for the astronauts to come speak. There are 3 female astronauts right now that are really beginning to look at our program and figure out how they can integrate with us. And I think that's an important thing for kids to look beyond the careers that they see now and look at people in non-traditional roles in NASA, in all the space agencies. And our relationship with them allows us to begin bringing that curriculum into our challenges. And there will be in the future a challenge that will focus on using NASA technology, the free stuff that they have available, and the knowledge, and helping kids learn how to use that to solve challenges that they're facing right now.
Thank you so much. And one other great resource is the webpage Women in NASA, which has wonderful testimonials from women leaders in NASA who work in all the different components of the organization, and they're great stories and wonderful examples and terrific role models that students can experience at a distance that can still really resonate and help those students to see themselves mirrored in successful people in the industry. So thank you all so much. That was a very rich discussion. So I think in the interest of time, Freda, do we want to move on from here, or do we want to take one more question? I think we may have lost Freda. So we're getting to the end of our scheduled time together, but we will linger for a little bit longer beyond. But I want to share some other resources with you all. And that is, if you have not already engaged with the National Alliance for Partnerships in Equity, NAEP, we are the nation's largest professional alliance of state agencies, workforce development agencies, individual institutions, and business and industry partners whose focus is on building educators' capacity to implement effective solutions to increase student access, educational equity, and ultimately workforce diversity in STEM and career technical education. And so we've talked a little bit about professional development. We haven't really talked about the public policy and advocacy and research, although a little bit of that came up. But one of the important roles that we have is also to provide technical assistance to our members. So if you have not become a member of NAEP, I encourage you to go to our website, as well as the websites of National Girls Collaborative, Nation Imagination, and the Educational Research Center of America, all of which are referenced in the handout from today, so that you can become further engaged in that work. So just to talk a little bit more about the resources that I had mentioned around our products and services with NAEP, we have professional development available through in-person engagements, materials that are in hand, and then also online, including this archived webinar that will be accessible to you and your colleagues following today's presentation. I alluded to these toolkits both in the chat and at one point during the day. So the Explore STEM Careers Toolkit is one that's available through the products link on the NAEP website. And there you can, there's a great activity around the grand challenges of the 21st century that Audrey was talking about. You can also order those Kudo Cards that she showed. And there's some other terrific activities with websites that educators can use to really engage students in expanding their lenses to look at STEM career pathways. Explore Non-Traditional Careers is a toolkit that came out last year, focused more broadly on non-traditional occupations in career technical education and expanding the participation, persistence, and completion of students in those pathways. Just this month, or actually now it's September, last month, our Realizing Potential with Mindset toolkit was released, which has terrific activities that educators can use with students to foster growth mindset and mitigate some of those barriers that we've talked about in terms of students' self-perceived lack of ability when it comes to STEM, and really build their self-efficacy around STEM. And then we will have new toolkits coming out in the next few months, the project-based learning for STEM equity, eliminating barriers by challenging gender norms, which is geared towards elementary and middle school age, and then inspiring courage to excel. So definitely take a look at those. They're off of our website under products. The other thing you can do is you can register to participate, if you haven't already, in our Pipeline Pressed. And this is a monthly newsletter where we provide information through a listserv. And then we also have our national conference called the National Summit for Educational Equity, which is scheduled from April 24th to 27th in Arlington, Virginia next year. And we will have a call for proposals coming out later this month, and would welcome the opportunity to hear about the wonderful work that you all are doing around the country. So I'd like to thank again our presenters for today's highly engaging and enjoyable webinar. It was a pleasure to work with all of them, so thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your resources, and your guidance to us in helping to look at ways that we can increase student access, educational equity, participation, and ultimately movement of students through the STEM pipeline into those occupations, especially for those who've historically been underrepresented through the lenses of gender and race and ethnicity. So as we wrap our day together, one thing that you can do is when we are finished, you will be prompted to access and download a certificate of completion that you can use for your own professional development needs. And we also ask that you complete the survey that Greg Nagy will tell us about as he wraps our time together. So Greg?
Thank you, Ben. So I'm going to move us to our last layout. And we have some links listed here. And what I'm going to do right now is click on the one that says Webinar Evaluation Survey. And I'm going to click the Browse To button. And what this will do for many of you will actually open this survey in a tab on your browser right now. If you have time, please fill it out now. If you don't, I will also send this as an email later. If it didn't open for you, you can click on the Webinar Evaluation Survey in the Key Links pod, and then click the Browse To button on your own computer, and it should open for you, or you can copy and paste the link that's there. And just to wrap up, I want to thank everyone and let you know that the webinar will be available in the next few days at the napequity.org/professional-development/webinars webpage. And we have other archived webinars there as well. And I want to thank everyone, and this is the end of the webinar.